Hello everyone and welcome to the new episode that we have with Tanya Martin. She is a curator in the Stradling Collection, and we had an amazing conversation about how she knew Ken as a person and his personality and his qualities. So it was a really great conversation and I hope you enjoy.
Tanya Martin. I'm the half-time curator in the Stradling Collection. I was born in Soviet Union, Russia, and I grew up there. I'm trained as an architect. I lived in this country over 30 years, and I've been in the collection for 9 years, and I've been a curator for 4 years.
And how did you get to know Ken, and how did you get to meet him?
I met Ken almost 9 years to the date.
Oh, wow.
9 years ago, I heard from Oliver Kent, who was my ceramic teacher at the time, that Stradling Collection is having a tour of the concrete house in West Braintree. And both my husband and I are architects. We really wanted to go there. So I just wrote to Julia, who was our central manager before. And I said, my husband and I really want to go to that tour. She said, yeah, just pay tenner and come. So we came to the house, mostly friends of the collection, and I didn't know anything about the collection at the time. And we had a tour, and inside the house, in the library, was a table. And at the table, it was Anika Rudd, who was doing ceramics with me. She was quite elderly lady. Beside her was a gentleman. It was Ken. So because I knew Anika, she made formal introduction, and I knew that Ken is proper gentleman, because you know how when you say, this is Tanya Martin, this is Ken Stradling, and he did, how do you do? Kind of really old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
And they were sitting together, and they were just going through the books, and we all kind of went around. And after this tour, Julia, the central manager, came to me and said, by the way, would you like to come over and see our collection, and maybe you would like to volunteer? And I said, I would love to come to see collection, because I never heard of it before. So that is how I met Ken.
So when you guys first talked to each other, and he said, "How do you do?"
Yes,
what was your first impression of him once he said
that? He was very, very proper, very kind of gentleman proper, very kind of not formidable, but not kind of chat. He didn't provoke me into sort of immediately kind of chatting to him. It was quite formal. Mm-hmm. But he had such a lovely face and such a kind of twinkle in his eye. I could see that he is not formidable at all. And also I could see he's very close to Anika. They're great friends. And Anika, at that time, she was already in her late 80s, and Ken was in his 90s. And I was very close to Anika. She was sitting behind me on a wheel, and she invited me for tea. And when I came to your house, she had original Hans Kopa ceramics and Kokoschka paintings. I mean, she was from quite affluent family, wealthy. And she was wonderful. She was so welcoming. She was Austrian. She was telling me about her past, and then she said that. So she met Ken. So she Anika kind of talked me to Ken.
Yeah.
And when I came to see the collection, I was so amazed, because being an architect, I saw the Marcel Breuer stuff upstairs.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about Marcel Breuer in London. I only knew of him in Bauhaus in America. Mm-hmm. And this was 2 years in between. And then Julia said, would you like to volunteer? Would you like to be steward? Now and again. And we only open, at that time, we were only open for half a day on Wednesday and a day on Saturday. So not very much volunteering. I said, okay. So I started coming here as a volunteer, as a steward. And Ken usually sat on Saturdays. He would sit at the table on the ground floor. And then we just start chatting, and he was asking me where I'm from and how I got there. And he was always talking to volunteers, very kind of giving them his attention and his time to show the appreciation, because of course we are based on volunteers. And so that's how we were just chatting. And then when I became a curator, beginning of July 2021, that when last year, so we started getting closer, because I would come to his house. He liked that. I would come to his house, sit down with him, and he just talked to me. And he talked, and last year of his life, he was talking a lot about people, but I can tell you about people kind of later.
And did you notice you had a lot of shared interests with him, from the beginning? Like there was so many things to talk about.
Yes, modernism was our main shared interest. And people, because I'm naturally very curious person, and I really like people as a thing, as a concept. And because he has hundreds and hundreds of most amazing people in his life, I really like listening to him about that, because it was about his relationship, not only with friends, but also with the suppliers, with his staff and the guild, and about his past, and it was just fascinating, and his stories was absolutely fascinating.
I mean, the amount of people that have reached out now that are like, oh yeah, I knew Ken through this way or this way. And
Ken was Mr. Bristol. Everyone in Bristol knew Ken, because everyone knew the guild, and they knew the guild was such a emporium. It was place to go and see what your house might look like. You might not be able to afford many things, but you could see and kind of imagine that your house might look like, and it might have that jug and that vase and that will look really wonderful. And Ken was always there.
Yeah, and I mean, from your volunteering to then becoming a curator, how do you think you helped the collection? Like, what did you do, or what was the main thing that you were interested in from the beginning that you wanted to work on?
So when I was volunteering, it was actually strange how it all happened. When I was volunteering, then I met my predecessor, Chris Yo, my dear friend Chris, who was a curator. But Chris he absolutely hated computers. And I loved computers because I'm quite a geek. So once I asked him, Chris, where's the catalog? He said, oh, we have this online catalog. I absolutely hate it. I started it, and it really needs some work done. Would you be interested? And I said, yes, please. So it was 2019. So he got people from Axial, I had training online one day together with him. He fell asleep. And I found the catalogue, and I found out it was only about quarter of the collection was listed, and whatever was listed mostly didn't have any pictures. And also whatever was listed, I didn't know where it was, because we didn't have any system of locations. So I started doing that, and then lockdown came. That was disaster. And so just before lockdown, Chris said, I buy you computers, that's yours, just work. So I started doing that. And the lockdown came, the computer was upstairs. And when we were allowed to go to work, I had my own key. I started coming here almost every day, because lockdown we all had time. And I would spend 3 hours upstairs doing the catalog. And I started photographing things, adding them in. And I did that for 2 years. And doing that, I learned the collection.
Yeah.
And then Chris, in 2020, in the end of 2020, he was offered a full-time job in the Clifton sale rooms, as well as he's doing things for BBC for Antiques Roadshow. So, and Oliver Kent came and offered me to replace him, and I did.
Yeah, because now you've got that information about from the cataloguing, and I think David mentioned as well in our interview how it was kind of all a little bit messy, and like everything was kind of all over the place. No one knew how much stuff there was, and I think every time you like undug more things, you'd like discovered there was more like ceramics and art that Ken had collected. And like from him becoming like a collector, what do you think his main influence was, in your opinion? I think everyone has a different relationship. Like culturally, what influence did he have?
Ken had enormous influence. He was, as I said, Mr. Bristol. He was known in all trade shows in Scandinavia. Ken essentially, that's my opinion, that's my absolutely private thing, but if you distill everything what he'd done. He single-handedly educated the whole Southwest about what good design is. When Ken came to the guild and started bringing bits of modernist glass, for example, he said people didn't know what to do about it. Because the glass, the amber glass, I just brought a piece of amber glass by Erik Hoglund with the bubbles to explain it. So when Ken brought this glass, from point of view of any person who knows glass, it's faulty because it has bubbles.
Yeah.
The glass had to be clear, dainty, pretty, and this was very functional and very undainty and very unpretty, but beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Yeah, but unbeknown to people, it was a designer of this glass, Erik Hoglund. He deliberately wanted to create these bubbles in the glass, and he was a hooligan. He used to sneak into the molten glass and throw the raw potato in it and see if it's going to produce the bubbles. Eventually, he produced the bubbles. But Ken said people were just not educated. They didn't know how to react to this.
Yeah.
It took time
Yeah.
for people to learn that not only dainty and pretty is good, but functional and solid and beautifully proportioned and beautifully made is also good, or even better.
You can have both at the same time.
Absolutely,
Do you think that was the effect of, the post-war? People weren't looking at things that were like different or unique, and that people were.
I think it was just evolution of design. Post-war, people in Bristol. Apparently, people in Bristol taste was the stripy Regency wallpaper. Eventually, everybody liked modernist things. Everybody liked glass like that now. But he was doing that single-handedly. He had this belief and this vision that is the future. It's not a dainty little kind of pretty little things, but that is the future of the cultural world and how we want to live. And of course, when he went to Scandinavia in 1959, first time, he completely fell in love with that, and that inspired him to become what he became.
Did he talk about Scandinavia with you personally?
Yes, he was saying how he didn't miss a single irrelevant trade show. He went to Denmark and Finland and Sweden all the time. And if you take our collection of our glass, I would think that 80% of our glass is Scandinavian.
And what influence did Ken have personally?
So Ken, in his life, to become what he became, he had 3 major personal influences. And then Scandinavia was not personal, but personal influences were, first of all, it was headmaster of his grammar school, Mr. Barton. So Mr. Barton was a populist of art, and it was a subject nobody knew about. It was design. The word even haven't been invented yet. But what Mr. Barton was saying, that in our kitchen we might have something which shares the quality of fine art. Of course, he was talking about well-designed things, which is true. And Ken got so hooked on that, and that was his first realization about his kind of introduction to the concept of what design is and what good design is. And second influence was his mother. She had a little bit of money, Ken told me, and she liked to go to auction houses. And when he was about 14, she started taking him with her. And he was introduced to the world of auctioning and things you can buy. And
How old was he then? How old was he when he
started? A bit 14, I think he started going with mother. But the first thing he ever bought himself, it's Elton Ware gold crackle vase on the top floor. Okay. He bought it in Albury Court, and he paid something like I can't remember. It said it's £1 8 shillings. He paid for that, and I always say to our visitors that officially it's the first piece in our collection, and Ken was 16 when he bought it. That is 2 influences, and the third influence was Betty, his wife. Ken always said he was a glass man, and Betty, and he didn't know much about ceramics, but when he met Betty in 1957, he realized, she knew she had a lot of friends in the art kind of scene, and he realized that a lot of ceramicists, they have nowhere to show their work and sell. And that was amazing, just to give this push to people like that. So that is Ken's influences, and then Scandinavia was his love of his life.
So, every kind of from when he was a child to when he was a teenager to when he was an adult, he had someone that was kind of keeping him going and influencing him and pointing him to this direction of collecting.
Yes, apart from the war really broke everything down, because he never had a chance to go to college, because when he was 18 he went to the army and came back and went straight to the guild to work. But I asked him once, I said, Ken, if you had a chance, what college would you go to? The design colleges, art colleges didn't exist then. The academy exists, but it was a place to go and do painting and art and ceramics, not design. He said, I will probably go to the engineering, because his father was engineer. And that was probably closest to, because yes, engineering is closest to design, isn't it? If you take, the beautiful mirror or something, beautiful chair. But it didn't happen because of the war. But he intuitively, when he came back from the war, intuitively he went to the guild rather than somewhere else, because his heart he had already seeds kind of planted in him about what he wanted to do.
That's so nice. And was his mother always kind of interested in going to auctions? Did she continue going to auctions with him, and was he kind of reluctant at the beginning?
I think that, the mother's influence, I think, stopped at the war, and because after the war he became big boy. You wouldn't go with his mother. They were very close. He always said he was only child. They were very close to each other, and of course then Betty came. So I mean, he only went to auction houses with his mom when he was a teenager, not later.
And when did he meet Betty?
He met Betty in 1957. Yes, he met her in the folk house, in a cafe. Ken has a friend who is Judy Black. She lives in Bristol, and she's 91 now. And Judy was in college with Betty. And then they started work together. Judy was a head of art in badminton school, big public school, and Betty was head of art in Clifton High School. So, and they shared the apartment. And Judy told me, once Betty was working to supplement themselves, so she was working in a cafe in folk house. And of course Ken used to go there a lot because he was just in the guild. And she came back and once said, I met a man. And Judy said, is he nice? And she went red. She was so
blushing.
Embarrassed. Yeah. But they married a year later.
Oh wow.
They married a year later, and they bought this house in Hot Wells. And Ken bought £100 for that. He paid £100. That's all. It was semi-derelict. The whole street was empty. It was derelict. It was one architect who bought the house and persuaded Ken that you can buy a house very cheaply, and Ken did that. The whole area of Hot Wells were going to be demolished because it was in such a poor state. It haven't been demolished. And he and Betsy started decorating the house and so buying things for the house, the glass and ceramics and things. So he started doing that. At the same time, he was buying things to sell through the guild to general public. So he was developing as a retailer. At the same time, he started this collection. He didn't start collection as a collection. He was just buying things with his young wife.
Yeah.
And then, so he never stopped buying things.
Yeah, and it sort of just kind of progressed into that. And he had so many influences, people and also cultural influences. But how did Ken contribute to the development of design, and how was he making his imprint in Bristol?
Well, it's very simple, because he was selling well-designed things in the guild. So when he started, he said the only thing they could sell was white utilitarian china, because after the war was nothing to sell, because a lot of people died in the war, and the manufacturers were establishing the export markets. So that was very hard. But eventually people will start producing things again, and in the 50s you see the exhibition upstairs. And I think when he was looking for things to sell, that was his development of his own eye to see what is there, what is good, what looks beautiful, what's well designed, what's well proportioned. And then, of course, with Scandinavia, we learn every single day. I learn every single day, and you learn every single day. And Ken was learning every single day. He got a lot of suppliers. People who were supplying him usually became his old friends. People were supplying ceramics, or people were supplying the mirrors and the sculptures. He was developing his eye all the time. And doing that, he was buying things which pleased himself, but they just happened, they were things well designed, and he was introducing that to people of Bristol and Southwest, and they were developing their eye as well. So anyway, it was a sort of interesting process, but Ken was very persevering, and he was he had a faith in design, that it's how things should be. And he was doing this absolutely single-handedly. He never had anyone to point him anywhere. That was kind of his vision. But of course, his vision was influenced by a lot of things around him.
Yeah. So he had such a good eye for things.
Yes.
And then he was able to kind of see, what people were going to like in the future.
Yes.
When people at that moment in time might not have bought that initially.
Absolutely. So the collection, as you know, is very eclectic. It has, so we have anything from fine art to big, very well designed piece of furniture upstairs. But everything which we have, or most of things we have, it carries this Ken's eye, his kind of his vision of design and proportion, and the concept as well, how conceptual design and also contextual design about what will look good in that particular position. Yes, he's absolutely. I think he will be so pleased with that new vase which we just acquired.
And I mean, speaking of certain parts of the collection, was there, when you talked to him, were there any kind of specific pieces that he was particularly proud of, or he spoke to you and he said, "Oh, I'm really happy I got this. I'm proud that I got this."
Well, Ken was a people's man, and I know that his collection is very autobiographical. So his favorite pieces were also his favorite people. So he told me once that his best collection is not a collection of things. His best collection is a collection of people he made over the years of his life.
Oh, wow.
Which was absolutely true. Because those people he started, in 50s, and he carried this relationship, he carried his friendships through the whole life, and was very proud of that. And it just happened that, for example, Richard Freeman, the ceramicist, he starts as a supplier. He just comes to the guild, supplies things, and then Ken meets him, and then they become friends, and then he starts buying things from him. And so it's kind of the same thing. This things and people were one.
So was he often kind of pointed to a piece and say, "I got it from this person," and
yes,
this person was like this, and I had this relationship.
And he had a special, for example, warmth. For example, he was cherishing something like we have a little piece of ceramic, which is not necessarily very good, but it was made by Betty, and that was special. When you buy something, it's when you have something in your house, it's not only because you like the shape and color. Also, it has your own history with that, your own story about how you got it, who gave it to you, and why. And Ken was exactly the same thing. So most things he had in his collections had some sort of human story behind it.
Do you remember one of the pieces that he might have had
we never kind of particularly talk about things. Interesting. I spent time with Ken. We always talked about people.
And that shows really. I mean. And with the people that you've met that have been Ken's friend, was there any kind of person that you met that was probably the most intriguing, or you kind of wanted to talk to them a bit more?
Yes, I happened to meet not briefly, maybe I happened to meet Ken's best friend, Colin Beals. Colin Beals was an architect, and Colin Beals was in Ken's life so much that when Ken and Betty went to Scandinavia, Colin was with them. He was always with Ken. And he was a man who redesigned this building to become our collection. And he's the man who designed that little mirror, which got the little mirror up on the top, which got the Duke of Edinburgh Award. And Ken was telling me a very funny story about Colin Beals. Colin Beals was an architect, was a lovely architectural career, but he also was Ken's best friend. And when they had to go somewhere to see, for example, supplier, Ken said, we had this agreement. Colin will drive me and I'll buy lunch. Things with Ken will always happen with lunch or dinner, something really nice. So, and Colin, it became such a joke about Colin driving Ken that Colin bought himself a little cap, and he looked like a chauffeur, like professional chauffeur. And Colin will come somewhere, and people saying, why is Ken taking chauffeur with him? It was kind of raw, and they really enjoyed that joke because people were getting confused what's happening, what's going on. And Colin was the best friend of Ken and his longest friend. And I met him. He was also doing ceramics. I was doing ceramics, and Erika Ruud was doing ceramics. And Colin joined our class to do ceramics. And he came about 3 times. And then he had a pneumonia, and he went to hospital, and that was it. He didn't come back. Mm-hmm. And Ken was devastated. He told me that Colin phoned him from the hospital and said, Ken, I'm phoning to say goodbye. Ken said, what do you mean goodbye? Ken could be quite, not rude, but kind of direct. He said, what do you mean goodbye? He said, well, I'm not coming back from the hospital. And Ken said, don't be an idiot. Don't say these things. But he phoned to say goodbye. He knew that he's not coming back. Mm-hmm. And he also was a collector, and he left his collection to Ken. We have his collection as well. Mm-hmm. So that was probably his best friend. And another friend we always laughed, saying that was Ken's last girlfriend, was Erika. Of course, not because they were both in the 90s, but Erika was wonderful. And Erika was an Austrian refugee when they were a Jewish family, and when the Nazis came to Austria, her father took 3 children to London. So she essentially grew up in London and didn't come back to Austria. From affluent family, she was also making ceramics. So she was Ken's kind of oldest friend in terms of age. Another very important person in Ken's life is June Lancaster. She was a headmistress of a school for children with special needs, and she was great in organization. And then she joined the guild. I never met her because she died when I came, and she became Ken's right hand in the guild. Ken was doing kind of businessy things, meeting people and connections, and June was just running the guild. And everybody knew June. They used to go and buy things together. So when June left, she was single, and when she died, she left her collection to Ken. And I found out very often she and Ken had the same thing in different color, because they clearly went somewhere together and bought it at the same time. So we have 2 plates on the top of Arabia plates, both luster plate. One blue one was with bird, it's Ken's, and the one with kind of botanical ornament, that is June.
That's so sweet.
And also I make sure that June's collection and Colin's collection, you know that is from June, not from Ken's collection. There has kind of special identification marker, because it's important, I think, to know these things, because it's part of our history.
Yeah. And if someone who was coming into this collection who kind of didn't know much about Ken, and what do you think they'd want to take away from looking at that collection?
People now coming through the door who not only haven't met Ken, they never heard of him.
No. Because
before, of course, when Ken was alive, everybody who came here, most people even met Ken. But of course, everybody heard of him. I remember last year, he was very adamant. We used to be Ken's Stradling Collection, and Ken was very adamant to lose Ken, to become just the Stradling Collection. It was his wish, not ours, to become less personal.
Yeah.
And it's the right decision, and it has every single right not to be something which belonged to Ken, because the quality of the collection is so high. it's really quite remarkable collection on its own. Doesn't matter where it came from.
Yeah.
And Ken had, I think, the biggest regret he had. He had a regret about not buying anything from Lucy Ray. You know that Ken made Lucy Ray famous. In 60s, people went buy ceramics. Well, now you buy ceramics by Dick Freeman and Kate Malone. Before, you just bought a piece of ceramics and didn't ask who made it.
Mm-hmm.
And Ken said no ceramicists were known. Nobody knew about ceramicists. Ken had a friend in the Telegraph, Elizabeth Benn. She was the editor of the Telegraph, and they were great friends. And she phoned Ken and said she was asked to write a piece about crafts. And she didn't know anything about crafts, but she knew Ken. And she asked him if he can help her. And Ken said, I have a supplier, Lucy Ray, in London. And I'm coming to London next week. How about you come with me and to Lucy Ray? And while I'm talking to her, discussing what I'm going to buy, you can have a look around and make notes. And then we'll have lunch.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. Always lunch. It's always lunch then. So Elizabeth Benn came with Ken to Lucy Ray and got absolutely astonished with what she saw. So she wrote this big article in the Telegraph about Lucy Ray, a ceramicist, and the first time it was just not just little vase, but it was pieces of ceramics made by this person.
Yeah.
And apparently that's how it started Lucy Ray's career.
Oh wow.
And of course Ken he would go to London 2-3 times a year to buy maybe 12 pieces from Lucy Ray. So he used to sell Lucy Ray through the guild. And he would come to her say, Lucy, can I buy something for myself? And she would say, no, Ken, I need to make something special for you. And next time again, no, I don't have any special. I really need to make something very special. And she never did. And when I was curator, Ken had a kind of little silent game. When I'll come to his house and he will tap the sofa beside him for me to sit down, and I'll sit down beside him, and he'll open the auction catalogue, and he will open it. It will be Lucy Ray's vase, and the price is 40,000. Wow. And he would just roll his eyes and smile because he never had anything. Yeah. So we had this little kind of.
That's just the one thing.
It was his regret, but also we laughed at it
yeah.
because he could be sitting on hundreds of thousands of pounds if he just had more Lucy Ray. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, also you've been mentioning his house, but what was his house like?
His house he bought it in 1958, and a lot of things were wrong with the house. It had to have new roof. It had to have decorators. So they did all that. And pretty much never did anything since. And the house was gorgeous. It had this huge Georgian house with huge, generous rooms with a big ceiling and enormous fireplaces. Interesting, they had some traditional furniture and some modern furniture, but it was just as eclectic as a collection. It's never been special, and also Ken never kind of said, "Don't touch that." You could, absolutely anything. My predecessor Chris said when he met Ken in the guild, the first time he went to his house, the first thing he did, he broke a piece of glass.
Oh no.
Or ceramics. He picked something, and because he was nervous, he dropped it. And I said, what did Ken say? He just laughed. So he'd never been precious about his collection. And now we're trying not to publicize it too much, but he always said, I want the collection to be touched. Because the tactility gives you, apart from your eye, the touch is just important to feel the texture of the ceramics, to feel the smoothness of the glass.
And did he ever show you around his house with all the artwork?
Yeah, well, yes. Ken used to open the house to what we do now. Like I'm giving tours, and he would sell the tickets to people to come to his house for a drink.
Oh,
so it will be a group of maybe 20 people who bought a ticket. And they will be just allowed to go everywhere with the drinks, and Ken will be there and we're talking. It will be like little soiree, like little party.
You've said so much about kind of through indirectly how his personality was, but I guess, how would you want Ken to be remembered as a person?
Supportive.
Yeah.
Ken was very supportive of his friends. And he was very supportive of young creatives. I came to Ken, I had a exhibition, my own exhibition in the Guild 1921. Ken was at home and he said, immediately bring me a catalogue, I want to buy something. And that was his way to support me. He bought that pot on the shelf, I put in the collection, but that was his way. And he was doing the same with a lot of people. You know, we have a Jessica Thorne's pieces for sale, but we also have few pieces in the gallery. And I asked one Jessica, how come we have 3 pieces of you? She said, I was working in a cafe in the Guild and met Ken and had the exhibition upstairs like we all had. And he said, where's the exhibition? I want to buy something. And he just went and bought 3 pieces and put them in the collection. That was his way of just supporting people who are doing something creative.
Yeah.
And I think that he will be remembered for that.
I think the big thing from what we've talked about here is his connection to so many people. I mean, there's been like so many, like the fact that he's opened his house to like 20 people to come in. He wasn't trying to hide it or collect it. And he was so open to talking about what he's collected and open to, you know, movements of the times. And I spoke about this with David, but we were also talking about how it's very hard for someone who is a collector to keep moving on with the times and seeing like what could be the vision for the future. Usually people are very like, this is my idea of what I think is good art and good ceramics, and the fact that he could see that ahead of time and continuously like change his opinion is so important. Did you see that kind of thing of like how he had an eye for it, he had a vision to see that?
Absolutely. I think that's the thing, because Ken wasn't a rigid collector. Collectors usually collect something of narrow range and then they'll collect everything in each color and each size. Mm-hmm. And because Ken wasn't a collector as such, he never set out to become a collector. That was very important. I tell people when they come here, as it just happened incidentally. So hence we have this book, Incidental Collector. So his collection is moving with time. What he was buying in 1950s were quite different from what he was buying in 1970s, because the time moved, the fashion moved as well. What people liked in 50s and 70s were very different things. So you could almost see the progression of time through the collection.
And do you often like show that in your tours as well? Like this is where he...
It is difficult because you really need to then isolate pieces from, like 1948, 1959. That's a difficult thing to do. But you can see, looking at, for example, ceramics, how you can definitely identify ceramics from 50s to ceramics from 90s because they moved on, they changed. And of course, everything about art is to do with the style, to do with fashion as well. What's fashionable this season? Yeah. But I think also another thing, which I always think very grateful to Ken, I think another thing he have to be remembered is it's a brewer story. He never met Crofton again, despite the fact that people think that they were friends. No, he was much younger than Crofton again. He tried to get a job in Crofton Gaines after the war, but Crofton Gaines manufacturing was already kind of on its last legs because he lost his showroom during the war and then he lost the factory during the war, so it was not doing very well. But Ken, in 1974, Crofton Gaines died in 1967, I think, and in 1974 his widow was selling the contents of the house. And of course, called Contents of the House, being designed by Marcel Breuer. Mm-hmm. And I think the widow asked Ken to be there because she wanted to sell it to V&A, essentially. V&A came and other people came. Ken didn't have much money. He bought just small things, but he recognized what he's looking at. Mm-hmm. It was just the most important piece of design history in Bristol. Marcel Breuer, coming from London, in that short period, two years between Bauhaus and going to America, and designing this piece of furniture. And Ken hunted. He was following this. He bought whatever he could buy. V&A bought 5 pieces, and the museum bought 1 piece. but he was following trail of the things, and eventually he got most of what we have upstairs. That is just unbelievable. That was Ken's single hand. He understood the importance of that, and he made sure that these things are back to Bristol. They all come back to Bristol.
I mean, to see that is like an accomplishment in itself. Yeah. As you are a curator here now, is there anything that you do to try and keep Ken's vision alive when you are curating, when you're putting exhibitions together?
Yes. Well, when I have a tour, I talk about Ken all the time. And I telling people about, because Ken is fundamental for this collection. That is, and my kind of mission to keep the memory of Ken alive and very well known to people who never met him, didn't know about him, but also keeping his aspiration and keeping his dream of collection influencing people's life and vision and understanding of design and art. I also, when I'm putting exhibition, I always think about Ken. Actually, in fact, I'm thinking about him a lot. Yes, and I think we all do. And he was absolutely remarkable man. And I'm feeling so privileged and so happy that I not only had time to meet him, but spent quite a bit of time with him.
And it's so important to, like, for people who are coming into this collection, you're the voice of telling people, like, this is who Ken was, this is what his personality was, and you're showing that in the collection and with your curating work. So what you're doing is literally kind of echoing his values and his ideas. So and you can see that.
In the very last months, I think, of his life, once he said, "Can you promise to look after the collection?" And I said, "Yes, I will." So I have a promise.
Yeah, and you've held that promise, and you will continue to, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Tanya, for doing
Thank you, Anika. That was good fun.
The Stradling Collection hosts a combination of workshops, tours and exhibitions showcasing Ken's collection. We are a small charity based in Bristol, open to the public and accepting of donations and sponsorships. More details can be found on our website included in the episode description. Thanks for listening.